Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming. The turnout is fantastic. My name is Sabina Shaikh, and I am a lecturer in the program on global environment and public policy studies here at the University of Chicago. Along with Pam Martin, we're the co-directors of the Environment, Agriculture, and Food Working Group, which is a new research group that we've started with a great group of students who are all here in the room and have helped put this together. And they're all doing very interesting research. So we hope to, by the end of the week, have our website launched, and we'll share that with everybody about our work that we're doing here. So why are we all here? I guess because we are interested in the topic, the urban food model in this case, and we were hoping to look at a couple different perspectives: economics, policy, science, and a lot around these issues that you've heard of: food deserts, local foods, hear a lot about urban agriculture. So these are a lot of topics that mean different things to different people. So specifically, what we want to look at today are some of the economic factors, so drivers of demand and supply, food consumption choices, some of the market types of barriers that lead to outcomes like food deserts, which we certainly hear a lot about in every sort of city. And Mari Gallagher, our first speaker, will be talking about that specifically, and she's done a lot of very good work in that area. Then we'll hear from Pam Martin, who is a professor here in Geophysical Sciences, who will talk to us about the potential to grow food locally and about the idea of increasing fresh food by growing it in the region and how that leads to job growth, community development. And specifically, she'll talk about the physical aspects or the environmental implications of growing food locally. And then we'll hear from Pam Cohen, who will address the role of the private retail sector in increasing fresh and healthy food options in urban markets. And so I think we'll have a very interesting discussion, and hopefully we'll get a lot of questions. I think it looks like we will, given the size of this room. So what we'll do now, the format of this is that all of our presenters will give a short talk, and then we will have a panel discussion and then open it up to questions. So I think if you can save your questions till the end, if there's a point of clarification that needs to be made, certainly raise your hand. But I think for the most part we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Mari Gallagher, who I observed that many of you already know from this room. So Mari is the principal and the founder of Mari Gallagher Research and Consulting Group. She's also the founding president of the National Center for Public Research. Her most recent publication, Examining the Impact of Food Deserts on Public Health in Chicago, is something I think many of you have seen or heard of, and that's how you've come to know her name. What I learned on the way over here, she's applying a lot of this research to many other cities in the country, small and large, and so it's obviously a topic of interest across the nation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mari and start it.
All right. Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for coming out. What a nice day, huh? Springy. All right. Well, you heard about who I am, so you know a little bit about the Chicago report. There are some updates to our original 2006 report on our website. We did one in 2008 and another in 2010. What I'm going to share with you today, I only have 15 minutes, so I can talk really fast. No. But I'm going to share some examples of what we've learned in other projects, like the Detroit project, Savannah, Georgia. We've been doing a lot of work in other locations, urban and rural and suburban, and we have a few projects that will be coming out, not really soon, but they're underway now in Ohio and Washington, D.C. So we do a lot of different projects at our group, but today I'm going to talk about food health and the market. So you guys are very, well read on this issue, so I won't belabor the definitions, but just for those of you how many people, anyone has not heard of the term food desert by now? I guess I'll ask that way. We used to have to ask who has heard of the term food desert. But basically, they're large geographic areas that cluster that have no or distant mainstream grocery stores. So a couple of other definitions and metrics that we've worked on concern mainstream food and fringe food. And I'm just mentioning them because they're pretty integral to our work. So a mainstream food location is a place, it doesn't have to be a chain, it doesn't have to be large, but it has to be the kind of location that could support a healthy diet on a regular basis. So have the kinds of foods that, if you only went to that store, and no one just goes to one place, but if you did, you could have a healthy diet. And a fringe food place is the opposite. It's not inherently bad, but if it's your primary source of food, your diet and your health over time will suffer. So we do a lot of work using those definitions and other definitions, as well as food balance, which is a metric and a whole body of work that we've developed, which basically looks at, can you make a choice? You know, what is the food balance in your community? Do you go twice as far to reach the good kind of place to buy food than, you know, the fringe food place? So again, it's not demonizing any kinds of food, but if, you know, you can't make healthy food choices if you don't have access to them. So our metric of food balance takes a detailed look at that. And this gives you an example of food balance and food imbalance. So this is for Chicago. This is relative distance in Chicago by race to either a grocery store, a mainstream store, or fast food. We don't use the label fast food by itself that much any longer. We talk about fringe food because it's not just fast food that we're concerned about now. It's all kinds of fringe food, like the kind that you'd buy at the gas station mart, or maybe the USDA food stamp liquor store, places like that. But in our early work in Chicago, we were looking at food balance being the ratio between mainstream food and fast food. And so these are the relative distances here in Chicago by race. As you can see, very out of balance for the African American community in Chicago, which the majority of predominantly African American blocks, you'd have to travel twice as far or farther to reach the good kind of food, if you will, over the bad kind of food. Another concept I just want to share, because we're focusing on it more and more, is the convenience food factor, which is another line of work that we're developing, which really hones in on our premise that people choose food closest to them, you know, generally, most regularly, even though they might desire or for medical reasons require healthier but more distant food. And so because we eat as people so often, you know, 3 times a day, we're constantly making food choices. And so convenience means location, but it also means other things like price and the hours of operation and so on. So this work is all done at the block level. So for example, in Chicago, there's 18,000 plus non-zero population blocks, and then we have a buffer area, which is the suburbs, and then in Indiana, because people might live near the edge of the study area and cross the border to shop for food. So this is how we do the work. It's you know, very detailed work at the block level. And in Chicago, as you know from, if you've read some of our studies, there are 3 key food deserts. Over 600,000 residents live in them. And the reason why it's important to understand about food deserts and the dynamics of food deserts is because in many locations, including Chicago, we find statistically significant relationships to worse diet-related outcomes after we control for other key contributing factors like income, like race, like education. And so in Chicago, we found, of course we did this in the regression, we found statistically significant relationships to more diabetes, and then also you know, more body mass index. And I'll confess, this is from driver's license data, height and weight, and we know that, you know, sometimes data is not, it's not in the perfect condition, and we know men lie about their height and women sometimes lie about their weight, but the thing is people pretty much, you know, either lie or tell the truth the same throughout the data. So we're really looking at the patterns here more than the actual scores, but we do see a statistically significant relationship with more body mass index, and you know, we find that when we take a fast food location or fringe food location out, that does not have the same impact as putting a grocery store in. And so this is why we're often talking about choice. Can you choose? Not because of our ideological feeling about choice, you know, being able to choose healthy food, but because of the pattern we find in the data. So we need to be able to have access to healthy food to choose that healthy food, and then once we do, then we can talk about other kinds of interventions, you know, like education and so on, and we can talk about price. And now let's talk about the market. So it's really a global market for food. I've been doing some consultation with Kraft, and I just met with them again at the executive level a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know if you've all been reading. Kraft is doing quite a bit. Walmart is talking more and more about healthier packaged foods in their stores. There's a lot of question right now, and it's a very global market, but it's a market that has a lot of indicators that drive it, a lot of question marks, and it's a market that plays out, that manifests itself, if you will, locally. So a lot of times here, and I've done development in the city a long time ago, developers, grocers, people who are building a Walgreens store and so on, have kind of their cookie cutter way of looking at a market. It could be a 1 mile ring, a zip code, and so on. If you're Little Village or Pilsen, you wouldn't necessarily fall into those parameters. So there are a lot of market issues in these urban areas, if you will, that are not only food deserts but commercial deserts that really have to do, sometimes it's just the market, and sometimes it's the inability of the market to respond, or the imperfections of the market, or the sizing methods. Not good data, not good information. So there are a lot of confounders when we look at the market patterns as well as the need patterns. Up until about the 1980s, the consumer price index and the producer price index for food tracked about the same. But then they started to diverge. And really what happened, this isn't so new, it feels new now because we hear about it in the news, but that was really the start of the food fight, if you will. So the traditional grocer used to win the lion's share of the food dollar. This is back in the day when a jewel was a jewel was a jewel food store in almost any market. Not quite, but if you had a jewel in Lincoln Park and one in Edison Park and one in Wilmette and one in Roseland, more or less they were the same. But the market has really developed into more of niche segments. And while this has been happening, more players have been getting into the food game, if you will. So Walmart got in about 1998. Right now they have 33% of the grocer market. Target, when do you look at a Tribune on Sunday where you don't see the ad across the bottom for Target and it's all food? Traditionally, it's a store that used to focus on clothes and other kinds of consumer items. Of course, we've heard about Walgreens. We've been doing some work with them as well. There's a lot of new players in the game, including dollar stores, gas stations, mini mart, and there's lots of reasons why people are going into the food business or are including more and more food among other merchandise. I don't know if we have time to talk about that. Maybe we'll talk about it in the Q&A. But if you can see here, the traditional grocers, they're having a shrinking share. And the other thing that's happening with these grocers is that, so let's say you have Jewel. Jewel is now owned by SuperValu. SuperValu also owns Safeway. They also own 3 other banners. So each banner has a different market segment, a different strategy, a different approach than their siblings in the company. And so that's why you're not seeing Jewels and Dominick's and other kinds of things in every single neighborhood, because the way they're perceiving it now, one size doesn't fit all. So there's a lot of segmentation depending on value, size, time to get in and out of the store, high end, low end, lots of different areas of consumer focus. So in many markets, this has been pretty good in many markets. Even in our neighborhood where we live, and we have many grocery stores to choose from. And we also have Peapod, and we have lots of different options. Now when we go pick up our prescription at our particular pharmacy, there's fruit and vegetables, and they've actually had it for a little while, frozen foods. It's not the same in every kind of market throughout the city. Competition is generally good, but in the food desert, you're not necessarily seeing competition play out in a way that offers more healthy choices. You're seeing competition play out in a way that offers more and more fringe choice. So, like say for example, the community of Roseland, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. In the community of Roseland, you might get your food at a gas station or a dollar store or a liquor store. There's a couple of Walgreens there too. It used to be a community that had 3 or 4 substantial grocery stores, but over the last 20 years or so, they've gone away. So in these food desert areas, you see more and more fringe food, which has high salt, high sugar, prepackaged, very little food that has good nutritional content. You see more and more and more of it. It's not just fast food. So there's a lot of different reasons why these markets are hard to redevelop. It can be done. this is Inglewood. A Food for Less shopper was talking to me about, before that store came in, where she used to buy her food. So this is what she has to say.
So they put everything so far away that you have the choice but to go to these small stores, corner stores, they have way too expensive.
Can you find fruits and vegetables there at those corner stores?
And if you did, you might be.
Okay, so that wasn't a prearranged interview. I just happened to come across her. But one of the important things I want to share, few people talk about, I think it's really important, is agglomeration. So in retail attracts retail and like attracts like. And in commercial markets that have kind of bottomed out, it's very hard, even when the residential population desires and can financially support more and better stores. It's, retail attracts retail, and the highest level of retail sets the tone. So now I'm going to show you the store that she was talking about down the street and see what you think of it. This is the store where sometimes she would go because, she didn't have any other location, and she'd buy some, fruits and vegetables. So not to pick on that little store, but when you go in some of these places, and many of them are in the USDA food stamp program, they're supposed to have certain types of nutritional products, and it's very hard to find things that are worth having for dinner. So as I'm running out of time here, I wanted to share a few more things. One of the things we did in 08, we've since updated this map. You can't sleep tonight. You can read that. You take a look at it on our website. In 08, I met with Mayor, I guess in 07, early 07, I met with Mayor Daley, and I asked him if he would use neutral data and information to prioritize grocer locations rather than politics or just taking resources and spreading them thinly. And he said that he would. And so these were the sites that we chose, and also on our website we show you the life back by disease if a mainstream grocer locates in these locations. So this was something that we worked on with the city, and this is the community of Roseland and our former health commissioner. We did some work out there with them, and you can see they're having a Please Come to Our Neighborhood Grocers rally. We passed out some pink pearl apples. But what I want to share with you is in this community, where all these people are, it's a lot of people, this is the highest impact community in terms of public health return. But the market seems pretty questionable. So what we did recently was we did a 1-mile scan of the center of the targeted site. So this was just in the newspaper today, actually. Did anybody see it in the Tribune, the story about the Roseland? Oh, yeah, a couple hands. Okay, so it's supposed to be an Aldi. This site has been under development, like proposed development, with developers kind of coming and going and committing and uncommitting for about 12 or 13 years. And so some of this work has helped set an agenda where certain sites got prioritized and so on. So this is slowly moving along. But these deals take a long time in some of these neighborhoods. So I'm curious, what's the food environment around this store? So you can't see probably, well, I guess you can. This is kind of big. So these are the stores that are nearby, and so many of them, as you can see, are pretty fringe, the different liquor stores and so on. So is there a market for healthy food? We did some work with Peapod, and they wanted to focus on need, but they need to focus on the market too, because they're not a charity, and they need to at least break even. But we did some analysis for them because they said they really cared about children. So we did an analysis by block to figure out the 100 top high impact blocks for children, looking at all 18,000 plus non-zero population blocks in the city. And so we came up with a cluster of them in Chicago Lawn. So we did some work with them in Chicago Lawn, and as a result, they opened that zip code. I don't know if you guys know how Peapod works, but if they're gonna take on a new service area, they have to take the whole zip code because of the way their programming works. The market end of it hasn't worked that well. And they would share this with you too. I'm not speaking out of school. We've presented together. It's hard to, first of all, in that market, they don't take, the USDA does not allow Peapod to take EBT, and there's a whole bunch of issues. So the regular Peapod business in that market is not necessarily doing that well, although Peapod in the food desert has about 2,000 customers already. But what we did with Peapod and Neighbor Capital was come up with this product that's meant to compete with fast food, if you will. It's a happy bag of fruit. I don't know, it's a happier meal than your typical Happy Meal. But it's like 10 pieces of fruit. It was $2.99, but it was too much of a pain to make change, so now it's $3. But, so this is something that's being put out through the social enterprise neighbor capital in food desert communities. So I think we need to look at traditional as well as untraditional, new types of models to work in the food desert. And I want to share with you in closing one example from Los Angeles. We did some work out there, and I was able to interview a woman in a community, kind of a little bit, I wouldn't say like Hyde Park, but a community that was kind of struggling and looking for ways to reconnect with food, didn't have a lot of grocery stores. And here's what she said.
Creo que nos ayudaría muchísimo, muchísimo tanto como lo que es negocio, jardinería, porque si pudiéramos entrenar a gente que pudiera hacer jardinería, podíamos tener en un futuro gente que pudieran cultivar y pudiéramos vender, hacer negocio, podíamos cultivar y vender eso o nosotros mismos también adquirirlo, nosotros mismos usarlo. Lo mismo que es cocina, cuando aprendamos a cocinar saludable nos va a beneficiar. Yo creo que toda esta comunidad lo que necesitamos es tipos de proyectos como este.
Okay, so that's what she had to say. So of course this is similar to kind of what we're hearing, right, in other neighborhoods throughout Chicago, throughout other parts of the Midwest, throughout the country. So how do you move from food desert to food oasis? And I think to do so we need to have a social policy imperative, a community imperative, and certainly as well a market imperative. It will take all three to move us forward. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Pamela Martin, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Geophysical Sciences here at the University of Chicago. She does research in two distinct areas, one and you may know a lot about, and one the other you might not know much about, paleoclimatology, which is the study of past climate change, and also the impact of food production on the environment. So I think a lot of you are probably familiar with her Feeding the City program that she started and runs here at the university, and she's also been helping to start and run the Environment, Agriculture, and Food Working Group. So
I'm going to maybe take our conversation in a little bit a different direction than where Mari was, although it kind of is a nice lead-in what she ended with the gardens. And I want to give you just a flavor for some of the research we've been doing. And I better go back. There are a lot of people involved here. I just put a few names up for the work here. Esther's a graduate student, and we have Todd Schubel, who does some amazing GIS work with many groups on campus. Sabina, of course. I didn't even name the interns. 20 is probably an underestimate of the number of students who have been contributing to the research that I have here, and they've done so much I can't put it here in this 15-minute slot. And Julia Govis, who runs the Illinois Farm to School network, as well as some researchers out at Argonne. So we've been asking some questions. I'm coming at this from an environmental perspective, of course interested in the social aspects of it and the economic aspects of it, but the questions I started asking were really environmental. And in a couple different ways environmental. So the first question is, in terms of producing food locally, to what extent can we provide food grown locally and regionally? And then once we can sort of quantify that, what is the impact of that food on the environment, on economics, on the social aspects of the food system? And finally, and this is kind of what the topic of what we're all talking about today, or bringing it towards that, and that's what the role of the urban food system. In this case, what I want to talk about is urban growing and peri-urban, or the growing around Chicago, and what that brings to the Chicago food system. But I want to start back and just talk about what the reason, the motivation of the environment. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with the food system, 4 tons per person per year on average. That's out of a carbon footprint of about 20 tons per person. So about 20% of our carbon footprint is our food. Now that's not so bad, considering that food is an essential part of life, but the 4 tons is what's bad about that. A big chunk of that is energy use in the food system, about half, and then the rest of that comes from the growing, the management of those lands, the animals, the methane emissions from cattle, managing the manure, and then a little bit from some others. But the big points are there that you have your animal agriculture, you have the land management for both animal agriculture and for grain and food production, produce production, and then you have all this energy. And the energy isn't just, there's not one part of the food system that's really dominating this. Although if we look at the top, a part of this conversation that we don't hear much about is household storage and preparation. And I just want to bring attention to the fact that that's an enormous part of the energy here. We hear about the idea of transportation. Transportation is this little chunk right here. This is 10 quads. This is about 10% of the energy use in the US. And agriculture production, this is actually growing our food right here. At the top, that chunk, big chunk of that are refrigerators. And so it's kind of a silly thing, we're thinking about the local food system, but I can't get away from the fact that we have to really think about these things. And the local food system potentially has the ability to change each of these aspects of energy use. And even not just the greenhouse gases associated with energy use, but perhaps also some of this right here. So the first thing we wanted to look at was capacity. We want to answer that first question about what is it possible to provide for us locally and regionally. Certainly it is a global market right now. In Chicago, food travels when you wait it for the different way. It travels train, boat a little bit, and then flying in, or most of it by truck, about 1,800 miles. That's what it's coming from right now. We have over 30% of it coming from California in terms of the produce, and Mexico. Produce from California and Arizona, another 25% coming in from Mexico. We don't have much of this food locally. So what could we do locally? Well, if we look at the urban centers here in Salmon, and we're thinking about, let's just talk about Chicago right now, kind of having that be the focus of this, you know, feeding our metropolitan area here. Chicago, 8.3 million when you consider the whole Chicagoland. And we have about 42 million acres of prime farmland that's currently cultivated in soy and corn. Now, how much land do we actually need to feed all of these people? Well, if we look at our diet, we can kind of look in terms of calories, and it looks pretty healthy when you put it this way in some ways, because here's our meat down here, about 1,000 calories per day. Most of us we're all primarily vegetarians, and that the chunk of calories is coming from grains. That little bit up there is from fruits and vegetables. Here we want to look at it by weight. Evens out a little bit. That's what we're shipping around. But in terms of capacity, what can we provide for ourselves locally, just in the theoretical sense? We need to get to the acres per year per person that we need. And if we crunch the numbers, what we find is that 1,000 calories for food, it takes the most part of the land, almost 0.7 acres per person, to provide us with this many calories for meat. The grain, even though there's this huge chunk, only 0.16 acres per person. And finally, it's that 0.03 up there for fruits and vegetables. Very small. That's 0.03 acres per person per year to feed all of us with the current food system right now, with conventional agriculture in the US. Now this is that system that I said is dependent on bringing food in from California and from Arizona and from Mexico. I want to understand the capacity of providing at least some more of our food locally. And we want to focus on this produce. As Mari was just talking about, we're thinking about making the diet more healthy and making fresh choices available. So the idea, where we start with this idea of knowing our farmer and understanding and bringing more fresh produce into the diet, is to really focus on that fresh part. So, but 0.03 is reflecting a very different climate, at least partially, than Illinois for part of the time of the year. If we take the conventional land, we see the conventional estimates that I had. We see with this amount of prime farmland sitting here in this great place in the Midwest, we easily have enough food, even providing for the meat in the diet to provide for everybody who lives in this area. And at about 0.6 acres per person, 80% of the cultivated land. So if we took all that grain we were growing, continued to feed it the animals the way we do, but keep those animals local, keep the leftover grain and eat it directly or turn it into processed foods, and then grow vegetables, we'd have enough land to do that. But again, this is idealized, and what we wanted to think about in our study was reality. What can we grow locally? How well can we do this? So with the dozens of interns, we attacked some data collection. It turns out there's just no data like this out there. We're really interested in understanding how a local and regionally based food system will have a different environmental impact relative to conventional. But each of those different segments of energy use and each of those different segments of greenhouse gases has the potential of changing under local and regional food system. And we just don't have the answers for that yet, so we needed to go out and collect some data. So we followed 4 rural farms, initially 4, I think we're up to 5 or 6 urban farms now. We've completed 2 years of the program, thanks to a lot of help from the program and the global environment here, who has been sponsoring some of our interns. We followed them for 2 years. We have a 3rd year coming up. And these farms are highly diversified in produce. When we talk about these local farms providing us with food, we're not talking about one big farm that only has carrots. They just don't exist around here. That's not the model they're following. They're trying to follow a sustainable type of agriculture, one with a mixed vegetable basket. They have 40 to 300 varieties growing on less than an acre in some cases. It's incredible the diversity that they have. And all of these farms that we're following are follow self-identified sustainable practices. Again, the question is, what can we provide locally? What can we provide locally and push the system in the direction that it's going? And the direction it's been going over the past few years is seeing more and more of these small farms that meet these criteria. So we have a whole farm study approach. We've been doing this very simple input-output analysis. All of these interns not only are pulling weeds, but they're bookkeepers. And they've been following all of the direct energy on these farms. How much gasoline are they using? How much electricity are they using? Anything they purchased, from paper clips, which one of our audience members has recently tried to figure out how much embedded energy there may be in, and to the hoe, to the rake, and then labor. Now, right now, we're just thinking about the environmental impact. The first question is the land efficiency, then the environmental efficiency in terms of greenhouse gases and energy. But we're also interested in economics, and to get the full economic and social impact, not only do we need to understand the inputs relative to the output, but part of that input is labor. So we've been tracking labor as well. So I just want to jump to the results. And this is after 2 years. These are pretty preliminary, although it's looked in terms of the the land use efficiency pretty constant for these 2 years. This is the number that's key. For urban farms, the efficiency of land use, that means how much they're growing on a square acre relative to how much can be produced conventionally. They are just as good to better, 100 to 150% of the normal. So that means you take an acre of land and you can grow maybe what would be grown in an acre and a half conventionally. So it means that urban farming, in terms of its footprint of land use, can be at least environmentally as good as the conventional system, and perhaps better. In terms of energy use, the same thing. Well, actually, much better. Direct energy use, and this is on the urban farms we're talking about, and much lower, 5 to 15%. So this right here answers our question about, first, being able to do some calculations about capacity, and second, about whether this makes environmental sense. So the first, we're going to develop a local system or change the conventional system and consider including local or regional agriculture in that. We want to make sure we're taking a step in the right environmental direction. This data on urban farms says it's a good step. It looks like it's going to be a good step. We're still telling that indirect energy use. But given that we know as a starting point it's no worse than conventional agriculture just by looking at the inputs, we know this is going to come out better. It's a little bit trickier with the rural farms. They don't grow quite as much on an acre as conventional farms because it's a low input method. They're not trying to maximize yields. Their direct energy use can come out lower, so that's a good thing, although one of the farms was just as labor and just as energy intensive. And it's again down to that indirect. So it's not as clear, but the data suggests that it's likely that even the rural, the peri-urban farms, are going to be producing foods with no more of an environmental impact than conventional agriculture. This is good news. It answers a question about whether the efficiency, essentially. So the argument that's lobbied against building a strong local food system or a regional food system is that all those small farms can't be efficient. And what we've done is sort of answered this question, at least for our region, saying, well, actually, it looks like they can be. So we used those yields. Fine. Okay, so one more. Okay, so we use those yields to look to show you what optimized mapping would look like locally. And if you look in the green color right there, around Chicago, if we covered that with produce farms, that is enough land to feed all the people in Chicago their daily requirements of fruits and vegetables. So the final answer is capacity is there, that we have the capacity to do this. And I just want to end up with two last slides. We have the capacity. How do we get it in? Getting it into some place like Chicago is easy. So that part of the distribution network is going to be easy or can be easy to modify. The next one kind of ends up with what Mari was talking about, and that's distribution. The idea of getting that fresh food to the people. And here we've just mapped out the farmers markets that currently exist in Chicago and all the community gardens that exist in Chicago. You can see they're spread out along there. We have estimates for what those can produce. And it turns out we could feed at least 20% of Chicago's population a couple servings of vegetables a day based on food that's coming from existing farms right now without even changing, and for about 6 months out of the year, which would be a reasonable amount given the weather constraints we have here. And one last thing to think about is that for those farmers markets that are distributed, we did a little survey, and it turns out people, the food from those farmers markets, those people are traveling less than 2 miles to the farmers market. And it looked like 80% of them were either walking or riding a bicycle. So the impact of using this as a potential distribution market, not to meet the entire need, not to meet that 6 servings a day or 5 servings a day that we might be like for our population, but just to introduce the fresh food and to connect people with food grown locally. There's huge capacity right now within the city and then in the peri-urban city region around it. So I used more of my time, I think, than I intended, but
That's great.
okay.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Pam Cohen, who is a behavioral economist at Dixon Eaton, where she heads up their reputation valuation practice, which is a service area designed to help clients enhance performance by maximizing positive impact of their reputations and other intangible assets, including investments in sustainability. So Dr. Cohen is going to speak to us about the business or retail side of things, and I'd also like to thank Pam for joining us on a very late notice. Thank you.
So I join everything is on late notice. Thanks. I'm listening to the other two speakers. I was thinking, I'm sort of approaching this from the more cynical side. The idea that everybody has their motivations for what they do, and that attitudes and behaviors don't necessarily, in fact, often don't jibe. And neither apparently does the Mac and my printing that used to be. Imagine them with a gap between them. So in most areas, attitudes and behaviors are often surprisingly unrelated. So people will give lip service, for example, to wanting more sustainability in terms of better sustainability efforts in the community, in their homes, and also in terms of being more socially responsible. But what they actually do tends to be very different. And particularly in this area, this tends to be the case because while we know that most people will conform to cognitive norms, in this case, most of us have been raised with a very careless attitude towards sustainability. Most of us weren't raised believing that resources were going to be depleted within our lifetimes, and we weren't really very conscious of that until much later. And so changing attitudes around that and actually behaviors become much more difficult. The same people who are running corporations are the same people who were thinking these thoughts. But with corporations, it gets even more difficult. Everybody's got their motivations for doing things. In large retailers, for example, a Target, a Walmart, a Whole Foods, they're still bottom line focused. The people who are running that organization are looking at how best can we contribute to market value. And even though their personal attitudes towards sustainability, towards say stocking more organic foods might be very positive, they have a particular mandate that they're looking at. And so people now who are chief sustainability officers, or before, when that job typically fell to, let's say, people in PR, in marketing. About 10 years ago, I was working with people in investor relations who were trying to convince corporate executives to care about environmental health and sustainability efforts. You have to have something in their back pocket to show that, indeed, these things do link back to market value. A few years ago, I was approached by Business Week, who said, can you talk to us about why being green matters in terms of corporate reputation, but then in terms of bottom line performance. Again, this is going back just a few years when people who were environmentally conscious were still known as tree huggers, and being green was still associated largely with Kermit the Frog. And so linking this back to bottom line wasn't considered to be the easiest thing to do. And in fact, a lot of corporations were doing things, but they weren't necessarily talking about them because they were doing them for their own reasons. Let's say, large corporations in aluminum foil were using all recycled types of materials, but they didn't really think about advertising that because it sort of seemed like it might be a turnoff to consumers. In the same way, this was happening at places like Target and Walmart and others. In any case, my area in behavioral economics is putting together causal models that link intangibles back to bottom line performance to let organizations know why they should care about these things. One of the best ways to put together an argument toward the case of being more environmentally conscious was to put together head-to-head competitors and see what would happen if they were to swap reputations based on what they had done in terms of sustainability to date. So if Coke and Pepsi were to swap, if Walmart and Target were to swap, and as you can see, if that's not as washed out as it looks like to me, the stock of the competitor that wasn't doing as well in those areas would rise in, not in the millions, in the billions if they were to swap reputations. And these are fairly simple models because we were relying on publicly available data there. In fact, in this particular article, one of the things that was focused on was what Walmart could be doing if they wanted to succeed in terms of being more sustainable in their practices. And in fact, 3 years later, they have become the leader in sustainability. They have a few other issues, but as you might notice or not notice, some of those issues have been largely glossed over because they've become such a leader in sustainability, like locking their employees in at night. There was a large outcry about that for a while. We haven't heard as much since they've become sustainable. one of the things that I wanted to focus on here is just what these organizations are looking at when they're making decisions about, are we going to make organic foods more available? It seems like a no-brainer in a way. I mean, it certainly does to me. And by the way, the thought of my consuming 3,000 calories a day was really disgusting. But let's say we're going to. They're looking at a lot of things that we're not, such as how are our customers going to feel when we have to hike prices up by a certain level? At what point at which are they going to decide that they're going to go elsewhere? Will they really come to us if we simply stock our shelves with better produce? Maybe, maybe not. There's a lot of other variables at play. For example, the space and ease of use, ease of getting there. What does it need to look like in here to attract different types of consumers? Who is going to have the largest share of wallet for me? What do we look like compared to our competitors in the area? What's the supply and demand look like? A few months ago now, of course I tend to squash time together, I think it was the New York Times was talking about Whole Foods' emphasis on trying to use local growers more often. However, what happened is that they kind of systematically destroyed a lot of these local growers and suppliers because they couldn't supply as fast as Whole Food needed it. And at the end of the time period at which they were supposed to ramp up somehow to be able to supply as much as was needed, they couldn't do it. So they either found somebody else or they simply stopped stocking it. May not have hurt Whole Foods' bottom line because they already had that group in their shopping. And things like customer relations, how much money do we want to spend on that, how many cashiers do we want to have versus whether or not we want to stock more of this type of a product, which one is going to impact our bottom line more. Now, just a little bit about the numbers that you're looking here. So what I do for these organizations is take a look at disparate sets of data and combine them and put together these models that let them know that basically here's how here's what your stakeholders think about you in these areas on a scale of 0 to 100. Basically, here's where you're not stacking up so well in their mind, and here's where you are. But also, what's the impact on the right-hand side of those? What's the expected effect of a change in any of those areas on an overall reputation? And because, again, the belief is, well, what's reputation if you can't link it back to some sort of bottom line performance indicator? What's going to be the dollar impact on your market share, on price tolerance, or on market value if you're to increase that reputation index by 1 point? So I build these causal models to help them make these informed decisions about what they're going to be doing, because the only way to change their minds about doing certain things is to say, it's going to cost you this much to put money, to put resources toward these efforts, but here's going to be the return on your investment. Where I felt that the New York Times got it wrong a few months ago when they were talking about many of these food manufacturers, retailers, and others simply saying that these efforts were just too much money, was that they weren't considering the intangibles. They weren't considering the impact on their market value by stakeholders that would be more supportive if they were to adopt these. And then there's a little issue of trust at the bottom. I think here's an example of where you have head-to-head, in this case beverage, companies competing for market share. And yet, when you see these organizations, they tend to track pretty closely with one another within a very small gap. And so, in other words, the competitiveness becomes quite fierce, particularly in markets like this, with a down economy, where little incremental differences are pretty big. And both Coke and Pepsi, by the way, have done some remarkable efforts in the area of sustainability. And Coke is just beginning to talk about some of those. What, for example, risks do they take on by focusing more in terms of their reputation or putting more out there in terms of stocking more organic foods, focusing more on that versus the Powerades and the other more sugar-filled types of products. Again, if you're interested in numbers, by the way, always happy to talk about them, but I never talk about them in a 15-minute forum. All right, so I'm going to show you one more thing. One of the things that's interesting here, and again, this is just breaking down discrete aspects of what they're focusing on. One of my students last night was saying to me, is this really all about what they're talking about, or is this about what they're doing? And my answer to that was, if they're not doing it and they're talking about it, it's going to have a negative impact very quickly. In other words, they may have a lift for a very short period of time, but then it's going to negatively impact your bottom line. However, if you're doing it and not talking about it, they won't get nearly the market value impact that they should from it, because, again, stakeholders vote with their dollars to influence these organizations. So somebody asked me yesterday whether or not they were sincere in their efforts or not. And my answer to that is always, it depends on what you consider to be sincere. Yes, they're bottom line focused. Yes, they understand that these things are better than others. Nobody's going to come out there and say, well, we're really doing this so that you'll shop here more. But if they get somewhere between the two and say, here's our messaging around what we're doing and why we're doing it, and leave it as implied, the fact that they've got market value at the bottom line, then they're being about as transparent as they can, something very critical right now. And one of the things interesting about these is that the more that they focus on investments within the organization, about being more socially responsible, about more environmental activities, about investing more in organics and the like, the better the impact is on their market value and their stock price. So clearly there's a lot of us focused in this area, and there's a lot of positive reinforcement for these organizations to get their arms around that. So cynical or not, that's kind of the way it seems to work. Okay.
Great,
good.
Thank you very much. Invite all the speakers up to the table. I'm instructed that you have to clip on your mic. So my question that I have is that, if we think about retailers, right, we take up the business side, and they're going to choose their location, they're going to choose their content of what's in their store based on demand, for the most part, or price changes in response to demand. Partly it will be affected by information, which I think is what Dr. Cohen showed us, that if you can show a company, here's what an investment in sustainability will do relative to investments in other things, that's obviously going to have some influence in business decision making. What I find, though, is that there's this sort of common idea that that food deserts are created based on a lack of access, right? And as being the most important reason, and that's probably one part of it. It's obviously one part of it, but there's also this idea of at the retail level, what's being provided and what people are choosing to consume. So I guess this is a long way of asking a question. In terms of the retailers, right, as Pam mentioned, they are making business decisions and they're deciding what to supply in their stores, and so it's there seems to be a common practice to blame them for not taking more moral responsibility of providing healthy food and providing this. So the question that I have really is about social benefits. So if we think that there are social benefits from everybody being healthier and consuming our healthier foods, what kind of programs or incentives do we see at a policy level to provide incentives for these retailers and these farmers to generate those social benefits or to provide the social benefits, right? And that's kind of the question that I want to open with is how can you convince retailers to go into certain areas and provide certain types of foods? How can you convince farmers to grow certain types of foods and provide them locally, given there's a social aspect to this, more beyond their private decision making? So that's just a question I'd like to, as kind of a summary of what we've heard today, to put out there. And I don't know if you, I think you can all maybe address it if you want, or one of you, but I think you need to, you have your mics on, and
so.
Then I'll turn it over to the audience for questions. But
Start?
Oh, go ahead. I think it was addressed for you.
Again, I think at least when I'm addressing sort of second layer questions like that in terms of how do you make that argument, if it's not socially mandated, then it's a matter of looking to the retailers and talking about the benefits that they would get by having a healthier population, for example. I still believe that you're linking back to the same bottom line, that you're not going to, you may capture the interests, but not necessarily the efforts of these organizations unless you can link back to, okay, so if I'm seen as being more socially responsible, for example, if I get the credit for reaching out to the community, how is that going to impact my market share? Am I going to get more people in here? Are they going to be more loyal to me as opposed to my competitor? And those linkages can be made both directly and indirectly for them. But in terms of actually making that as a moral imperative, it's not a strategy that I've seen work. Whether or not that's a bad thing is more for the philosophy department. From my perspective, from just looking at human psychology, when you find out what motivates either groups or individuals and you go with that, then you're going to have a much more direct line in terms of influence.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that one of the reasons we're interested in following these urban farms and seeing the potential for them, both the sort of professional urban farms and the community gardens, as well as kind of the peri-urban agriculture scene, isn't to say that we want everyone eating local foods, but it is a way to expose more people to fresh produce and to have a connection with that and to be involved. And perhaps we can change behavior a bit through that way. And then once we change the behavior, the consumption patterns change. And then perhaps this will help to draw more stores in and to change it on a larger level. But that's sort of the goal of having that aspect of the food system.
I think in your question you raised a number of important things. The two things that caught my attention most were your mentions of incentives and then also supply and demand, and I guess the use of the word blame. So just a quick response to that. First of all, we already have lots of incentives, and we have had for decades about what gets grown in this country. So that's really influenced the market. In terms of blaming grocers, I don't, at least in our work, we never really look at it that way. We are asked a lot about supply and demand. We do talk to a lot of fringe providers. They say, some of them, not all of them, well, I would have this healthy food, but I don't know, no one would buy it, or and that's a very simplified response. It's actually much more complicated than that. They're not necessarily trained in handling, there's probably like 20 different things just around that. That we can talk about. But regarding, is there demand for healthy food? I think generally there's two problems in the food desert why you don't have mainstream food solutions. One, and this is again simplified for our brief discussion tonight. One is you don't have good market data and information. I'm not saying everybody in the areas where this is an issue would go run and buy nothing but fruits and vegetables. I'm just saying that sometimes there's not good market information, and sometimes there's just not enough demand for those kind of products to sustain the store. And so I think it's important to have good quality data and understand, you don't have one incentive program and say, well, anybody who goes in the food desert anywhere gets, an incentive. I think you have to really understand the genuine market demand because retail attracts retail and like attracts like. There are very problematic Yogi Berra problems in areas that could have stores, but we've interviewed lots of grocers too as well, looked at data. The grocers go there, they don't see any grocers, and it's like the two, if you let me, my husband is an economist from the University of Chicago, so he's not teaching here now, but he got his PhD. So I'm going to pick on economists from the University of Chicago. It's like the two economists from the University of Chicago walking down the street, and they say, hey, wasn't that a $10 bill we just saw? As they keep walking down the street, and the guy says, no, if that were a $10 bill, somebody would have picked it up already. So there is some of that going on, but that doesn't detract for the fact that in some of these markets, the margins are still very tight for grocers. It's very hard to find locations. There are a number of problems, and there are markets that are very iffy from a regular break-even plus perspective. And I think that's where we need to be careful. If we're using incentives, whether it's TIF or other kinds of things, we really need to understand and have transparency around those kind of public resources.
Thank you. Please open it up.
I have a question for Pam, actually, based on your, you had said that a student brought up, are these companies really doing these things? And you said, well, if they're not, they're going to pay for it soon. And I think for some of those, it's true, and there is transparency, and the social parts of it might be the case. But for the environment, I would argue that that's not necessarily the case, that there's not transparency, and a lot of it could very easily be lip service in terms of what they say they're doing for the environment, or do something very easy to identify. Support Sierra Club, because that is obviously someone can check and say that money went to Sierra Club. But when you're talking about the environmental policies and true sustainability, I question whether what they're saying is going for it really is going towards it, or whether they know the fact that that's the case.
I think that's right. Yes, I don't think that everything is that rosy or that transparent. I think there's a movement in that direction. And the reason I think that there's more of a movement in that direction is the other part of this conversation was about social media. And, there's nowhere to hide anymore. There are some really smart people out there on social media who pick up on things, little threads, and will pick at it, and, within days, if not hours, things are picked apart. For anybody who thinks that there isn't an impact of social media, on print media and on bottom line performance, we prove that time and again. So I just think that there's a lot more watchdogging going on out there, and I think it's a lot harder to hide. Is there a lot of glossing going on out there, or a lot of attempts to hide things? Absolutely. Can they hide like they used to? No, I don't think so. When I work with companies, and again, I will say, no matter what the organization is, the people who tend to be working in terms of sustainability and in corporate social responsibility are some of the most passionate people I've ever met, regardless of who they're working for as a larger entity. And when I hear about the things that are going on within the organization, I may not be hearing the whole of it, but the efforts that they're talking about, if they weren't happening at all, we would be picking it up somewhere fairly soon. So I like that movement towards more global transparency. We've been talking about that for a good 10 years now, and now there's no getting around it.
That's a really good plug for tweeting as activism.
Yeah, I still can't bring myself to say that now.
Okay, so why don't we take questions? I don't know. Woody?
When I leave the library here at midnight, I'm stop at Bart Mart, which is open till.
What's it called?
Bart Mart.
Okay.
There is no fresh fruit or vegetable.
Bart Mart doesn't have fresh fruit, Woody?
So I'm thinking, well, if we can't even bring this to our own campus,
Mm-hmm.
what would it take? And I think it would take a technological innovation. Someone to invent something that would allow fruits and vegetables to last a long time, so that there was no demand, relatively low demand for it, you could still sell it. Is that on the horizon?
Yeah, it's called local food. Local food has a longer shelf life than food transported across the country.
I think you raise where I see a real interesting question, though, and that is the romancing of food. As much as local food is important, fresh food, I know in our family we eat a lot of, healthy, fresh food, but I think we really have to meet consumers where they are, and also think about what will work in some of these markets, and not have such high standards that we can't bring other kinds of food along. And so when you talk to like a craft and get a craft to start thinking about packaged food that's healthier, I mean, part of the problem is when we look at some of these markets, like we're doing the county that Cincinnati is in right now, Hamilton County, just the concentration of all these fringe places, and they're not equipped, maybe they're like Bart Smart, or whatever. Maybe they could sell healthy food there, and maybe some of it would move. Maybe it wouldn't be at the right margins. Maybe they couldn't buy the right efficiencies. Maybe they just aren't into those kind of foods. Maybe they're already making a lot of money on their packaged food that sits on the shelf and is tasty and cheap and all that stuff. So how can we make packaged food easier and healthier? Not easier, but healthier. And so even looking at some of the patterns for earned income tax credit returns, and I've done some work around low income, all different kinds of tax issues and low income populations getting money at tax time. In some ways, for some of these populations, what they really need, and I know this is going to sound very unsexy, but is like a really good freezer, or if you could grow your food and then freeze it. I mean, I am very much into the local and the healthy, but I think we have to be realistic. Like, what's in the University of Chicago's vending machines? What are some of your, when you have meetings, what will the treats be? When we, like, what are the decisions that we're making? And so I think we should look around and make differences right now where we can, but I don't think we should rule out packaged food. I think it's part of our reality.
I'm just wondering about efforts to, like, the biggest problem that I see there is that you can't use EBT at most of the food stamps, at most of the convenience stores. Mm-hmm. So when people go to a corner store, they're going for candy, alcohol, or toilet paper, like some random miscellaneous item, and things that aren't covered.
You saying they don't take the EBT, or the things you buy with the EBT aren't good?
A lot of the corner stores have to pay extra in order to be able to take EBT, so most of them don't. So then what happens is that people don't do their shopping there because it's not going to be covered, and if their produce can get covered at Safeway or wherever else they're going to do it there. And I'm just wondering if I've asked people several times and no one seems to know if there's efforts to be able to extend something like that so that people, especially in food reservation areas, can have access. Better
right.
Access.
EBT allowance, if you will, has been an issue in a lot of different places. What's strange is, like, when we go to different parts of the country, we find tremendously different patterns. So, like, in Detroit, everybody's in the food stamp game, so they make it easy. Everyone, and unfortunately, 92% of those providers are fringe. And that's a significantly statistical relationship with more death there in that city, not fast food, but that's why we changed the definition. But in other locations, like you go to the South, some places do and some places don't. And I think in some locations, I'm not saying that this is the issue in Oakland, but in some locations, some of the providers don't want to have those customers, or they just don't want the hassle of it, so you can't really force the retailers. But I think the technology is becoming easier and cheaper. So in some of these old-fashioned stores, they don't want to take credit cards or anything like that either. I think it's kind of in that genre. But I'm not so aware of a big cluster of these in Oakland. I do see a lot of gas stations are in EBT, and then you go to Ohio, some are, some aren't. You really have to, it makes for quite a data exercise. You have to practically call each one and find out, and also look in the food stamp data. But so I think it varies, but that's a good point. And Peapod has the same issue. They want to accept EBT, and for some reason they're not allowed, although there's another internet grocer that did get clearance, so it's kind of up in the air. Any other thoughts?
I want to get to the information that you gave about 0.03 of an acre per person per year.
Yeah.
If I do the math right, that's about 150 square feet. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so 35. You're figuring how many pounds per square foot per person?
Well, so we have, 35? Well, yeah, I guess that's about right. I'm trying to just, yeah. So the pounds per square foot vary a lot based on what you're actually.
Okay, if you're good, you're going to get about really good at urban egg. You're going to get about 3 pounds a square foot if you're really good combined between kale and butternut squash.
Yeah, tomatoes more.
Yeah, that'd be about 450 pounds. So what are you figuring per person per year of assuming I don't know if you said a 3,000 calorie? Or...
Yeah, so the idea is on average the in order for us to consume, we consume more like 2,200 calories, so you can relax. You are so not consuming 3,000 calories. Just thinking. But in order to get those calories, we're delivering 3,800 calories per person to the market, essentially. And so based on 300 calories per day of that going, I think that's what the number is for fruits and vegetables. So it's based on that. What we do is we take the mean American diet, we say this is on average what we're all consuming, and translate that into caloric quantities and then into yields. And so that would be where that data come from, that way. And then the local data are very different in that we have all these different things growing on 1 acre. So we have to compare them in reverse too.
Is it fairly accurate that an adult consumes under 400 pounds of fruits and vegetables in this country per year?
It's like 300 kilograms per year that's delivered, and we're not consuming that much of it. So we're consuming less than, that's 2/3 of that.
In at least these two presentations, not Professor Martin so much, but there's like an emphasis on sort of getting the retailer to come in and do that. Yet, as the woman from Los Angeles said in the presentation, there's a desire for training and resources for more self-generated solutions. So, like, what kind of emphasis, if any, is placed on sort of, getting facilitating community-generated solutions internally, rather than sort of focusing on large retailers who are also constrained by the same kind of market dilemmas that you talk about?
I think there's a lot of movement these days around your very question, and so we've been very hopeful. We have seen a lot of groups around the country form food policy councils, and we have one here in Chicago that's been around a few years, and we see them start putting together action plans, and so they've been thoughtful in fact, many of them deliberately don't put the retail piece front and center. So they're all of these plans are a little different. But what we always say is there's not one single problem or single solution to the food desert. And by the way, these stores take a long time to build. And so if you can look at existing stores and also some of these existing kind of fringe providers and help BART Smart cross over, that actually has a bigger impact in the data. And then at the same time, work with community groups to kind of grow some of their own stuff and kind of reconnect with food and work with the farmers markets, get the farmers markets accepting EV. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things. And so I try to be really cautious and not say, well, it's, the retail piece. The retail piece is important, but it's not the only piece. So that's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I was hidden behind this building. I had a question for with Pamela Martin when you were talking about the input-output of the urban, rural, and conventional farms. And you said the efficiency of the direct energy use is 5 to 15% of conventional, and that's astounding. So my question is, one, are these the same data, or are they coming from completely different sources? Is there a compatibility issue there? And two, regardless of your answer to that first question, why would you explain such that dramatic?
Yeah, it is a really low input. Those are for the urban farms, and they're small, so many of the things are done by hand. They're able to grow really close. In terms of the direct energy use, we can think about City Farm, who doesn't have any electricity or direct fuel use at all. One of their biggest fuel uses is an indirect use, and that's getting ice from the Starbucks across the street to put in the cooler to keep their food cool on the way to market. So it's just incredibly low input agriculture that we're talking about. They're relying on, that's just the direct, and even their indirect inputs appear quite low as well, because they're growing in compost that they grow themselves from city wastes. So the efficiency is incredibly high for those urban farms. It was quite astounding, really, to realize this. I think coming in from not knowing too much about urban agriculture, it all seemed very crazy. You're growing in the city. What do? You bring your dirt in, you have to build all this stuff. It just seemed, but when you compare the weight of these inputs that they do bring in, it's small compared to the inputs that conventional farms are having to trek around in terms of pesticides and fertilizers. And having that compost available locally that they make, not having to have electricity necessarily on site when they're just growing and they go home, having a small farm where you don't have to have trucks going across your farm to move workers, to move produce, it all makes a huge difference. And it's not going to be the solution to our food problem. I'm not suggesting that urban gardens are going to feed all of us, but it can be a part of the solution in the sense that it is possible to integrate a lot more fresh produce into our diet and get us interested in it by growing more of it locally. And it can be a solution for some things. Like a good example is lettuce. The New York Times had an article a few months ago that said it doesn't matter where you grow your lettuce, whether it's grown locally or Timbuktu, it's going to have some enormous figure of amount of energy that goes into it. And it's just a blatantly wrong fact. There's nothing to back that up. That person was assuming that all this lettuce is grown in greenhouses under high input methods, and that's not what's occurring in Chicago. You know, I've gone out to farms in sub-zero weather here. They pull back the fabric cover and you see greens growing there. You know, they have the labor pool, they have the compost to grow it in. That's where the efficiency comes from.
In your survey, just I'll follow up with this quickly. In your survey of urban farms, do you look at the cost of the land? So like right now, land is pretty cheap, right? So if we can imagine a time where land will not be cheap anymore, do you look at how that factors into their decision of where to locate?
I think we need to. I mean, right now we're talking about nonprofits who have great deals to get this land. And if, you know, will this be commercially viable? I just don't know. I mean, land is in high demand in the city, or it could be. They still want a lot of money for it to have it permanently. So I think it's a temporary solution. Todd? Oh.
I had a question specifically for Pam Cohen. With regards to the businesses coming into certain areas, do they see it only as charity, especially just because of the low population density in where these food deserts exist? So basically, they open a store, they know they're going to take a loss just because there's not that many customers to take advantage of. It's not like people are going to come from someplace where there's high accessibility to someplace where there's low accessibility or something like that. Do they see it just as charity, or do they intend to hopefully make a profit one day in some way, shape, or form?
From the organizations that I work with, they see it as eventually being profitable if it's an adjustment in terms of what they carry, in terms of the space that they take up, and also in terms of being seen as being more socially responsible and thereby attracting other types of customers in other places. You know, they are focusing to some extent on their bottom line, you know, if not now, then in the not too far distant future. Okay,
but a larger business is really the only one would have an opportunity in these areas. Say like a mom and pop grocer opens on the corner, they can't make the money up, you know, or make the profit up someplace else until that store sort of shores itself out
right
in that way. So in that case, the mom and pop basically doesn't have a chance.
Which is a problem. Yeah, I mean that's a serious issue. I mean,
the mom and pop doesn't buy the efficiencies either that the big store does.
That's right. They can't afford it, and so you know, if they're, and oftentimes they're involved in things that are much more charitable and in ways that, you know, most individuals would see as being much closer to, you know, an altruistic form of giving than the larger organizations, but they just can't afford to keep it up for any length of time or to go in places where they're going to operate at a loss for any length of time either.
I skipped over Bryn and then I'll come back over here. Okay, over here.
Oh, so following up a little on that question, why is it that mainstream grocery stores with the healthy food are always they seem to have a minimum size of about half a city block?
Yeah, you know,
because if you want to feed a densely populated area with healthy food, you're going to have to be able to open these up in like a Chicago storefront.
Right. Actually, I didn't have slides in this presentation on your question, but size is one of the real hot buttons lately. So even Walmart is talking about doing stores as small as 7,000 square feet. One of the things you heard it here tonight, and actually others have probably predicted it too, but one of the new trends I think is coming around the bend too in retail will be, and it sounds awful, but it's actually working. It has worked for over a decade in Europe. Automated retail too, very small. It's sort of like the glorified vending machine. But So you're seeing more and more. So Tesco was, is still trying out stuff on the West Coast and has opened different stores and has tried like a 10,000 square foot model. I think that's motivated Walmart to start looking at that. So that's the whole point of there's so much diversification in the grocery game right now. So you have the super Walmarts at their jumbo size. You have potentially a small Walmart storefront, might be a little bit more than a storefront. You have a whole bunch of different things in between, and then you have diversification about, is it perceived value? Is it an Aldi where you pay a quarter for your shopping cart and go through and, no frills? Is it, a Whole Foods? So there's just so many different flavors of it. And the problem in the food desert is that, in some of these other higher income markets even, and some of those other lower income or lower, more value focused retailers can still do pretty well. There's a lot of different options and competition. In the food desert, there's not, there's kind of just a lot of fringe food, and they're usually not providing healthy food. But we will see much smaller storefronts. That's the new hot thing.
So it is profitable, people just haven't done it.
They're figuring it out if it's profitable. Yeah, they're trying it out. And I think Walmart's getting into it to a large degree because Tesco is. And also because in some of these urban areas, you have to figure out, it's very hard to put these deals together, like you said, a whole block. And that's why what Walgreens is doing is actually kind of exciting. They're not a grocery store. They don't want to be. They're a pharmacy. But when, we've mapped some of their data, when you look at all the markets they are in, just across the city and across the country, so if everybody can step up, again, not saying that, well, you're a food desert, you can't have a Jewel or a Dominick's or whatever, but you got your Walgreens. I mean, that's not the answer. But it is still good that everybody steps up and tries to provide it. But, they too are looking at their margins, and what we're finding is that industries are using, like Target, they've seen their frequency of people stopping in their stores rapidly increase because the margins on food is tight, but it draws people in because people eat so regularly. So like the average trip to the average, I think it's like 2.5 trips to the grocery, whatever that is. But if you're going to go into a Target or another type of store like that and get some milk and some things you need tonight, then you might make another purchase, and that's why they're doing it. They're trying to draw customers in. So food is often the loss leader too in some of these markets.
It's clear from all of the participants and then the questions that it's a multifactorial problem in terms of getting fresh, accessible food to these areas. But I'd like to have some of the comments from each of you on two specific areas. One is the topic of food safety, because it scares me that someone's going to a Starbucks to get ice to keep their food refrigerated, when we know from just basic 8th grade science fairs that one of the most microorganism-rich sources is ice, and I fall on the sword for food safety. And the second would actually go to the interesting comment you made about transparency. So many of the food manufacturers, while there's a movement to go more organic, are certainly playing with nanotechnology, and while it may not be the nano food, it may be the coatings and the packaging that they put around it, and it's very hard to get at that information. And so it's obviously, as you mentioned, a schizophrenic world, but as food prices are expected to jump, and the cost of product today could very well consume more of the food dollars in a budget, how is technology, changes, and safety in your minds going to be a factor?
Go down one. I think technology could be a really exciting driver across all the different things that we talked about. I mean, we're already using our smartphones to help document where stores are and use apps for the lat and long. And I've been in discussions about how you can use apps to have kind of consumer, neighborhood resident feedback on some of these USDA stores or other types of stores, as well as safety inspections. So the meat is good, the meat is bad, whatever. So I think technology is really going to be a driver. And in many of these food deserts that are also commercial deserts, they're also technology deserts. But what does everybody have? A phone. So, and now, in another 10 years, the phone being the new, computer. So I think we're going to reach a lot of people and do a lot more and have improvement through this smart technology, through phones and other types of things. In terms of food safety, we see we see some terrible gaps, certain places where there's a lot of food that's out there that's not safe, but we haven't actually, that's been more anecdotal, we haven't studied that. But I think that we just have to really lean on our health, are the people who are supposed to be monitoring these stores to make sure that they're doing so and do food safety audits and things like that. I don't have too many comments right now on transparency, but I do think that more transparency overall, whether it's what are the methods to inspect these stores? Are they part of the food stamp program? Do they comply or not? How come this? What was the public return on this $2 million TIF investment? I think there needs to be transparency across all those lines, and I think social media and smart technology will certainly help all three of those lines. This is my comment.
I was thinking about the vilification of years ago when we first started writing about this. We were talking about Monsanto. And, this was in the 90s, and there certainly transparency was not happening very much. And when it came out in terms of the GMOs, Monsanto, the hit it took was just remarkable, and they certainly weren't the only ones. But at that point, they were certainly buried beneath an onslaught of not only angry consumers, but of course the government jumped on the bandwagon because while others slid by, and then eventually people came to the defense of those things and said, well, maybe this isn't so bad because after all we're trying to create foods for a sustainable future, but again, I think now more and more the response to these things tends to be, or at least the actions tend to be driven by, we know that eventually if we're doing things like this, it's going to get found out. So I think the difficulty comes for them in the shaping of the language around what they're doing. There's more transparency, but we all know there's a lot of glossing over of these types of things. So for example, when there's issues around acrylamide being produced and from fried foods and things like that, if you can't have communications arbitrage, then you at least set out to say, okay, we know this is happening and here's how we're taking care of it. Again, it's still not the sort of perspective that we would like that says, like Johnson & Johnson, who actually, not talking about a food, but about Tylenol, when they voluntarily pulled everything off of the shelves, that basically made their decade. I mean, they became, just, the angel of, all things pharmaceutical, and, we trusted them with our babies for many, many years just by that kind of an action. So that's become sort of, I would say, the way of these groups is to say, okay, we know this is going to come out eventually. Let's put our best foot forward. Let's keep an eye out for these things, and when they happen, at least let's respond to them quickly, if only because we know that that's the best way to get through it, the best way to be able to recover our reputation and to continue. Go ahead.
Does it concern you, though, that the literature since then has showed whoever frames the conversation when we're looking at a new technology builds that trust? And that's exactly my point. Given what we've learned about product recalls, we're not seeing that. A lot of the research that food companies are doing to increase the sensory experience in drinks, to use these nano capsules and nanoparticles, they are not moving ahead. It's being done pretty secretly in all of the companies that you've named, Nestle, Kraft. So I want to hear you clearly. Are you saying that they will wait and then articulate and move first, whereas if we're really going to embrace a sustainable corporate environment, I would think we would take the lessons learned and improve and kind of be at, food 3.0 rather than food 1.5. Do you see where
I see what you're saying, and I see the difference, and I don't relish being cynical about it, but I think your food one and a half is exactly right. I think those lessons are being taken, and there's some sort of a blending of the two. Now, I work with some groups that are heavily invested in improving the quality of food through, from soil to harvest, and those include some big manufacturers. But, on the other hand, they're also still trying to keep their investors and stakeholders happy, so.
I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, I would have to come at it from a little bit smaller perspective, but post-harvest handling is sort of what we're talking about in terms of these small farms. And the small farms that are in operation now are all trained in this post-harvest handling and talk to inspectors about that. In the case of the ice, they're using ice that's for consumption that would go in the drinks that we would drink, and they put things in plastic on top of it. So I think that is just, that particular thing is just not an issue. But it is an issue as we think about scaling up. Yeah. And as and the city of Chicago is thinking about this as well. And I guess I'm wrong. It's not just post-harvest handling. It's also the soil that they're growing in, and downwind of something or too close to a road. And the city of Chicago are working on regulations right now with this in mind. And we're also working on organic standards with this in mind, saying, how do we adapt this and what do we need to look for? Because people aren't trained in urban food safety in that way. And I think the city in particular is being very proactive about this. Maybe they've gone a little too far in some ways, but they're thinking about it from that direction. And I think we're going to need some regulation for these urban farms in terms of where you grow and how you grow, and also training for the post-harvest handling.
May I follow up with
Yeah.
Do you know of other states, and it would immediately come to mind, where there are robust, urban farms? We wouldn't have to create the template. I would think that there would be a logic to sharing the knowledge from urban planning and from some of the regulatory. Do you know if that's going on? Because we don't always have to create the wheel. We're a city in economic dire straits, as we all know. So to get the best bang for our buck, how would that, in your world, where would you look for models?
Right, so the city does look to other cities, and they meet with other cities. In some ways, Chicago's ahead of a lot of other cities, not all of them, but many others. They look to San Francisco to see what's going on there. The Netherlands
I was hoping someone was going to say the Netherlands, because we don't have to be so nation-centric.
Right, yeah. But a lot of the foreign regulations, when they've made regulations in terms of urban gardens, have thought about developing countries rather than developed. And we're in a different situation than that. We've, saw all this industry in our past here. So the things we're exposed to in an urban environment are different than in a developing country. They need to worry about human waste a lot more. We need to worry about human-made chemicals. So, yeah.
So I know we have some questions left, but we've gone over our time, and I want to give our presenters a break. So I would just like to say a few things. We have a reception next door, and so hopefully our presenters will stick around and take a few more questions. I wanted to thank the Workshop on Global Environment and the Food Policy group at the Harris School for co-sponsoring the event, and all the students who volunteered, and of course our great presenters and the wonderful questions that we've gotten from everybody. So thank you.